Chats with Changemakers, I talked to Juan Manuel Serruya, ex-head of engineering at Spotify, current CEO and founder of Datia. Datia is a 4-year-old software platform that helps professional investors understand the sustainability of their investments. We talk about how Datia started off by enthusiastically building a mobile app for consumers, but then pivoted to becoming a web platform for wealth and asset managers. We also dive deep into the importance of having a laser focus on your ideal customer profile, your ICP, and how to identify the next adjacent target audience when you're ready to move up market. I'll let Juan introduce himself. Enjoy the episode.
I'm Juan. I'm the founder and CEO of Datia. Datia is a platform for sustainable finance. So we work with professional investors, think about asset managers, banks, pension funds, and so on. And we help them understand the sustainability of their investments. So we source data on companies, mutual funds, ETFs, and we help them calculate things like, okay, what is the cow food in my portfolio? What is the gender diversity between my portfolio? How can I improve those metrics to do a better job from a sustainability point of view? And we work, we're a company based out of Sweden. We work primarily with Nordic asset managers today. Stage-wise, we are 15 full-time employees, hiring a few more folks. And yeah, that's what we're working on. Yeah, my background is on product and tech. I moved to Stockholm to take a gig at Spotify, where I kind of grew from engineer to head of engineering there. And after that, I started Datia.
And about your maturity stage, so you mentioned 15 people. When were you founded, and kind of how much funding did you raise so far?
Yeah, so we started the company in very late 2019 with a different idea, or like kind of similar, but to a different target audience. We raised a pre-seed of €500,000, and we closed a seed round of €3.1 million in June last year.
How did you come up with the initial idea? Do you come from this market? Do you have a background in it? You say Spotify, so it seems pretty far.
Yeah. So what happened was that Spotify went to the stock market, and suddenly I got more interested in investments and stocks, things like that. And by that point, Robinhood was pretty popular, or Trade Republic in Germany as well. And I started to think about how could I find companies or funds that were doing good things for the world, like besides the financial profile. So the original idea that we had was to build a platform for retail investors, so a broker, where you had a sustainability-first approach to finding investments. Maybe like you wanted to support a certain cause, like reducing carbon emissions or gender equality. We could who are the leaders in this space and help you find those companies. We launched a version of that and run into all of the B2C fintech metrics that people run into, like high customer acquisition costs and all that good stuff that people struggle with on fintech. And when we started to talk to the professional investors instead, we realized that they had a huge problem as well. They were also managing more capital. So it was a much more straightforward way for us to have impact, to work with these like larger investors, and also a much more straightforward business model from maybe like charging on transaction fees and things like that, moving all the way to, okay, we'll help you solve this problem and charge you a yearly SaaS fee as well. So that was a whole, moving from a mobile app into a web SaaS model. Yeah, so that's the pivot that we did.
And so you had this idea. Did you instantly start building, or did you do some validation?
Yeah. So I'm an engineer, right? So what I did was I spent the first 6 months, or like 3 to 6 months, just building what I thought was a great idea. And then we realized that, okay, like some aspects of the idea were good, but as we started to talk to users, obviously we learned that a lot of things we had assumptions for were just not either product people didn't have, or not the right way of approaching them. So the first like big mistake I will say was just like go and build this idea, because it's also what you're comfortable doing as an engineer, right? So that's what we went for in the beginning.
People struggle with is to figure out when to call it, basically, when to say, okay, this failed, right?
Mhm.
Because as you say, you started with these consumers, and at some point you made the decision saying, this is not a success, we need to pivot. But I see a lot of founders doing this too quickly or not at all. So how did you decide it's just not working out with these consumers, we need to switch?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that it wasn't so much about this is not working, as it was much more like we learned more about the space as we started to talk to not only our, because what triggered the pivot was we were working with these retail investors, so everyday people investing, and we wanted to connect them with mutual funds, like professional investors portfolios that were matching with their values. So then we start the conversation with these professional investors. So, how do you guys work with sustainability? How do you source your data? How do you understand your portfolio? And as we started that discovery process, we learned, okay, they have a huge problem, much bigger than the retail folks. They have a bigger balance sheet, so we could charge them a yearly fee that could be substantial. And also they manage more capital. So if the whole goal of the company is to transition capital towards sustainable investments, instead of transitioning 200 euros of a person, we can transition 2 billion euros from a mutual fund. So then we saw, okay, this is a much more interesting problem to tackle. And we went for that. There is also, I mean, it is a fairly known problem in fintech that B2C is very tough because of, customer acquisition cost is very tough to tackle. So yeah, it was not so much that we failed at it. It was more like we were struggling with it, and we saw a way for us to move towards a much more straightforward way for us to have the impact that we wanted to have and to build the company we wanted to build.
Is it fair to paraphrase that you almost stumbled upon these ICPs that really worked out?
Yeah. I mean, because I think that a lot of something that I think a lot of the initial phase of like discovery from a startup is about like, obviously it's about validating these ideas and and building it as lead as you can and the whole MVP thing. But we were basically building a little version, showing it to people, and then as we continued to do that, we started to talk to more and more industry players. So we started to learn more about what is the actual thing here and how does the industry even work, because in the beginning we actually didn't know much about how the industry worked at all. We were like quite outsiders.
Yeah.
So, but in a way that also has the advantage of you don't know what you're getting into, right? So if someone had told me you're going to spend the whole year building an app that you're going to have to throw away, and then it starts kind of from scratch in another problem, I would not have signed up for that. But that process of iteration and talking to people kind of got us where we needed to go. And
I actually looked on your website before, and that stood out to me, that you really doubled down on these 3 ICPs that you talk about: asset managers, wealth managers, and tech platforms. And I find that very interesting, right? Because I think it's something that most companies are afraid of doing. I've also been a part of these companies where we kind of knew a message would resonate more if we would really direct it very specifically. But then we were always thinking, oh, but then we're excluding other people. We might miss out on sales, right? So we didn't do it. And we stayed broad in the end, and we failed and crashed, as we do. So I find it really refreshing to see you speaking with such clarity. And I was just wondering, how did you build up these 3 ICPs? Did you start with one? How do you identify which are the right ones, and how do you learn about them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we did a lot of what you're discovering in the beginning of, we are the platform for everything that everyone should use. And something that you learn as you do more work is that you need to solve one problem for one type of customer very well, because there are competition in almost all of the verticals and size of customers and things like that. So the more you can narrow down and be super good at something, the easier it will be to sell, actually, than if you are kind of okay but not great at anything. So that's something that we definitely learn on the focus side. Our ICP now is these professional investors that are managing like medium pools of capital. So in the investment world, that means between like 100 million and 5 billion euros. That's kind of where we see our product today being a really great fit. And then there are these like more enterprise, very large asset managers where we are now like thinking, okay, how do we evolve the product to be a good fit for those folks? And a lot of that is much more about integrating with their current stack, the current data lakes. These organizations have a lot of their own processes and data and expertise. So a cookie cutter product that kind of solves the whole thing for a customer that is maybe smaller is great. But sometimes if you want to go into enterprise, you need to evolve the product or kind of do maybe an API first offering that they can integrate or something like that. So if we were to say this is the best platform for any asset manager, we will be failing because we will be losing a lot of conversations with the very large ones. Also, maybe burning out those leads for the future as well. So the more we can stay focused on our current ICP, let's go out, expand our clientele there, and later on evolve the product to go for more up market, the better. It will be bad for us to just go and try to sell to everyone because we just don't have the best product there. Depending on the type of company you want to build, if you want to build a very large company, I think you need to have some kind of idea. Okay, how do you go from 1 million to 10 million ARR, right? In the beginning, it's okay. How do you get to 1 million? Right, that's like the beginning, and then you're getting close to 1 million. It's okay. How do you go to 1 million to 10? And maybe you can get there with the current product, but then the question is going to be, okay, how do you get from 10 to 100? And then at some point, you're going to have to figure out, okay, have some kind of idea on what will mean that to your product strategy and your expansion to get to that next level. And I think the job of the CEO a lot of times is about trying to paint a picture and say, okay, this is how we're going to get to the Series A, but this is how we think we can get to the Series B or 10 million ARR.
I like this Jeff Moore from his book Crossing the Chasm. He always calls this the bowling pin strategy, which I really like. Because I also get this a lot when I tell people focus on one target audience, and people say, but then the market is not big enough, right? Then we're never going to survive. And then I say, okay, just think of it like Jeff Moore says. It's not my analogy, sadly, but think of it. This is your first bowling pin, and you knock that one over, and then the idea is that you knock over adjacent bowling pins, right? So you outline the whole alley as a good CEO, and also when you talk to investors, you talk about the bowling alley, but you focus on your pin.
If you already have one leg on one product that is moving the needle, you might be in a position where you can actually try to sell the product before you build it, right? With some kind of like LOI or so you can maybe get 4 or 5 of these French asset managers like, okay, if we ship a version localized in French by this date, will you buy it? Yes. What will you pay for it? Yes. Okay, you got 5 of those. Let's try to sign some kind of letter of intent or something like that, and then you go out and you know exactly what to build. You did like the pricing product market fit, where not only they want it, but also how much they will pay for it. So I think the more you do of that, the better, because the last thing I want to do is get all of my engineering team building something before I know that that's sold, or because that's a huge risk for the company, right? To do that.
I think that's super good advice. So this first part, I think, is the advice, like decide your next target segments or your next ICP based on demands that you've actually seen already, which also kind of conflicts this idea of really zooming in on this one target audience. I think in the beginning, you do keep it a little bit of broad, so you do capture that kind of knowledge, right? If you're only going to talk to this very specific little bucket, you just miss out on all of that knowledge. So it makes sense to capture that, but then decide on the next one based on real proven interest and make it proof, as you say, have them sign something. Because this is a situation I've been in many times of sales agents coming and saying, we have this big whale, this really interesting client that we need to sign. They just want XYZ. Now we have to build it. And I was a relatively young, naive product owner and did it, right? And made it happen. And then in the end, of course, the client never, ever signed. And we had this very big, bulky, incomprehensible product with all of these hidden features, kind of like the Microsoft toolbar. It was not good.
That's very common. And I think besides that, I think building even that's one aspect of it. Okay, building something that a potential whale wants before they commit anything to buying. That's one aspect. The other aspect that I think is pretty common is building a product that people pay for, but maybe one customer wanted, and then you are suddenly doing like a consultancy software platform, right? Versus more,
Yeah. So the answer is customer discovery.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, gathering the data to know, okay, what could be the next bet, and then validating that bet, basically. And the more you can get to a concrete proposal with concrete timeline, concrete pricing, the better. Something you could also do is have some kind of like discounted first year, if to build it together as some kind of like pilot program. That's also something that some of the larger customers might want to do with you, given that the integration times and so on.
Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot, actually. A lot of people talk to me about co-creation. Exactly that, because you get people to tell you exactly how they think, right? It's kind of nice to involve them. Another big benefit that I've heard, of course, is that during this time, you're already collecting references and you're already collecting their language. So you don't only have product market fit, but also language market fit. You can literally use their words on your websites. You come out with testimonials of these big guys that you want, which is also quite a benefit. And of course, the downside is that you can get sucked into pilot projects that are never ending, because you don't want to give them too much power over the requirements in the end, because otherwise, it goes a little bit out of control. And you are a consulting agency.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I think it's so important to do this as lean as possible, because you never know, maybe their priorities change and then they drop 6 months of work because they have so many resources, right? I mean, it's very common that I go to a meeting with a large bank and it's me on the meeting and 12 people on their side. And it's like, what, you know what I mean? How much is this meeting cost them? Like, I could build an entire product on this meeting's cost.
Yeah.
But so there is a lot of that as well, like keeping in mind that they are fairly unpredictable on the early stages until they make a firm commitment on something.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, and also funny because you come in with your lean mindset, right? With a whole startup stuff and agile, it's going to be lean, and then you walk into an enterprise and they will be like, "No, we need 1 million features, otherwise it doesn't work."
Exactly. And now, last year we talked to a large asset manager that basically the buyers said, we really like your product, but our management thinks that you are too small to work with still. And 6 months later we come back, we suddenly have 5 more customers on board. So then you continue this relationship. I think as long as you have a strong product, you can always try to push a bit more a market, and you should be able to get quite far with that, even with the same ICP, because a lot of it also is about, like, especially on the finance sector, it's about just trust on the brand and on the people, and who are your shareholders, who else is your customer, and so on. For a lot of these large buyers is, are you going to be around in 5 years or not, right? So a lot of times it's not even about product features, it's a lot about brand building and traction and social proof.
And this is hard to get in, and I think that's why this focusing on a niche is almost imperative, right? It's this idea of you're always going to be a tiny fish in a big pond, or maybe you'll become a big fish in a very little pond, right? It's a little bit easier to cover, but nonetheless, I think the move to enterprise is always tricky. So because you're kind of looking for early adopter enterprises, which are, I think, relatively hard to find. But I like what you said, your sales strategy. I was just thinking about this guy, Zig Ziglar, is this sales guy who was selling, I think, pots and pans. And it's this idea, he wrote a book about it, basically, about how he did it, because most traveling salesmen who were selling pots and pans, they would go by each city and they'd give it a shot, right? They ring everybody's doorbell and said, "You want to buy a pan?" And maybe 90% said no and 10% said yes. So they sell these pans and then they move to the next village. But Zig Ziglar, he didn't, right? He would kind of take his caravan or whatever and move into the village for a month and just sit and have dinner with them and cook for them and go to church and just be there. And in the end, like stay for a very long time, but sell to maybe 80% there. So it's also about not going for quick acquisition, but having this long breath and investing the time. that is in reality, I think, very hard to do. To be honest, I face it myself as a freelancer looking for clients. It's very hard to continue investing time in a relationship when you don't know if it's ever going to go somewhere, because it also costs you time and money and effort. So you have to be willing to have that long breath. So I think in theory, I'm like, of course I should do that. But in reality, it's relatively hard to do that. Even for sales agents, it's way more fun to just close a lot of sales, right? So how do you, is it a type of person you hire for the role? And how do you do that?
Yeah, so this is a very, very interesting conversation. I talked to one of the like most known VCs today. We had like check-ins from time to time, and we were talking about, you know, what kind of things we should look into accomplishing by the next, you know, fundraise or something. So, you know, it's always good to know what they're seeing on the market and so on. And one of the things that we discussed a lot about was, you know, ARR is always you know, a key metric, but it's mostly about like the quality of the ARR. You know, how old is ARR? I mean, of course, churn is a thing, but also can you add something to the ARR that is tells more of a story about, okay, are people actually getting a lot of value out of this money, or you know, you just have a very strong sales team or spending a lot on acquisition and then growing that ARR, but you know, it's gonna all come down crashing in a few years. So I think, you know, this involvement in the community that you mentioned, you know, going to church and all of that stuff, is about like building that like quality relationship with the customer base. I think it's super important. We are really focused on in Sweden and the Nordics now, and primarily is because it allows us to build a better product for those customers. For example, we can localize our reporting into Swedish or Norwegian, right? So like the more niche you are, the more you have also an advantage to incumbents, right? Maybe they sell worldwide and they don't have this thing you can do because you're focused on the Nordics. But also the social proof aspect become easier because we sign one Swedish fund, and then the next Swedish fund knows about this fund. So then, okay, they know who they are, and it's a bit easier, and our customers kind of know each other. And maybe like when we decide, okay, let's go out and focus more on Norway, they already know the Swedish funds. And I think having that, even though we could, you know, we have an internet product, we could sell it worldwide, having this more like niche focus on, also from a market perspective, and also from not only from a customer type perspective, it has a lot of advantages. And it's another like counterintuitive thing of like, no, but we want to sell to everyone, so why would we only do this niche on this one market, right?
Yeah.
But it puts you in a very advantageous position both from a building the best product for that market, and also from a social proof perspective, and building those relationships and you know, helping them kind of join your mission more so than you selling them a product that solves a need. More, you know, going to church with them, even though we don't quite go to church with them, but you know, that same mindset. Yeah, it was super nice talking to you, Ilse.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night.
You too.